Welcome to the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you level up your instruction in order to craft authentic learning experiences for both you and your students. I'm your host, Lee Tucker, a high school English teacher and ed tech enthusiast, and I want to join you on your journey to becoming the best instructor that you possibly can. So if you're ready, grab your adventuring gear and let's get going. Hey, what's up, 8-Bit crew? Today is Thursday, February 11th, and you're listening to episode 27 of the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you guys are doing well. A lot of us are really feeling those midwinter blues. I know I really have been this last week or so. So hopefully you are making it through February all right. We got Valentine's Day coming up, working through a couple more weeks of February, and then hopefully getting into some nicer, warmer March weather and springtime stuff. So hang in there if you're having a hard time, if you're struggling. Keep pushing forward and find those little bits of encouragement to keep you going. So I've got some pretty interesting stuff today later on in the boss battle. I'm going to be talking a little bit about creativity and ways that we could start to instill creativity in our students in a little bit different way than what we might expect creativity to look like. So make sure to check that out later on. Before we get into that, though, we'll be looking at some news and updates, and then we will take a look at what our treasure is for this week coming out of the treasure chest. So a few things coming out. One from Formative. If you don't know what Formative is, it's a website that allows you to pretty much do just that, create formative assessments for your students. I've used that a good bit this year, and I really like Formative. I like the way that it's laid out and the information that you can get from it. But some of the updates came out in February, at the start of February. One, there's the show your work section, types of questions in Go Formative now have better support for styluses and touchscreens. So if you have students who are doing it on their phones or doing it on tablets and using a stylus or something like that, there's a little bit better support and functionality with that. So that is that's a nice little update there. Also, they are adding in feedback notifications, so students can now see notifications in the progress bar as they're working through, and they can see when there's an unread message from a teacher on a question. So they can see like this little pop-up kind of notification icon, and then they can click on it and go directly to that feedback and response. So it helps to kind of shorten that feedback loop there as well. Users can also now use 2-finger pinch gestures to zoom in and out when they're working on that show your work canvas. And you can also access multi-touch drawing in show your work as well. Now, I haven't checked that one out. I don't know exactly what the multi-touch drawing entails, but I do know that it is now available on there. There's also some improved scrolling on the enhanced PDF image doc format. Your students don't have to worry about missing a question with the improved scrolling. Now it goes through all the questions on a PDF before moving them on to the next item. So if you've used this before and you've had students who maybe skipped over a question on accident, there's some functions there now that can kind of help that out as well. You can now add PDFs anywhere where you see add images available. So you can put anywhere where you would normally put some kind of picture file. You can also now add PDF images, and multi-page PDFs will appear as separate images on the canvas, and each one can be individually edited or removed. You can also change your formative profile picture for those of you that like getting into some of that and doing some of those avatars and all that. You can add a profile to your or a picture to your profile really easily now, and that is now available. you can now access and adjust student information on the assign screen now. So when you are on that assign page, you see to the right side, you'll see the little student icon with a number next to it. Now you can click on that and it will load up a little pop-up that has the student information, like their last login, the ability to reset a password, student email addresses and all that. And you can change that stuff right there on the fly. You can also filter options in the tracker page now. So you can filter the tracker by grade, by subject, by common assessments to make sure that you're getting the type of information that you need on there. And that would be more for maybe the larger schools that are using that across different content areas. But as an individual teacher, you can even see more specifics on things like assessments and all that. And then finally, if you are a premium user for Formative, the LTI grade passback, which is kind of your connection to some of your Google Classrooms and all that, now has a complete or incomplete grade. So you can essentially, if you're having them do a Formative, a little assessment on there just as a quick data point and aren't really concerned about the score on it, you can check to essentially give them 100% if it's been submitted, 0 if it's not been submitted. So that kind of participation aspect of on there. So that all will take care of some of the Go Formative updates. As far as Google Workspace updates goes, there is a new update in Google Search now. So if you do any kind of search, when you get that results page, now you're going to see on a lot of the results a menu icon, the 3 dots menu, to learn more about the results or where the information is coming from. So with that additional context, you can make more informed decisions about the sites you may want to visit or results that will be most useful to you. So it's going to give you a lot more information about the source of the information and all of that. So that whole credibility and fake news and all that kind of stuff, it's just another step in helping inform people about the sources of their information. A new feature that's rolling out in Google Meets is going to be the ability to check your video and any peripheral device quality before you join that call. So essentially what it's going to do is it's going to give you a quick preview of how you're going to appear to others before you actually enter into that call. And some of the examples that they gave of things that issues that it will catch are going to be things like unintentionally muted microphone, a secondary display monitor with a missing headphone or speaker connection, any other audio issues such as like poor sound quality, audio that's too loud, or maybe your microphone amplifying background noises. So it'll give you kind of a quick check and give you a heads up as far as what kind of issues you might have potentially going into that meet so that you can fix them before you actually enter into it. And finally, in some Microsoft news, Microsoft Immersive Reader continues to expand its reach and its influence. You might know, in recent months, Microsoft Immersive Reader has really expanded into things like Flipgrid and Wakelet and a lot of that. Microsoft Immersive Reader is now integrated into Discovery Education. So if you are somebody that uses Discovery Education, they've got a lot of K-12 kind of resources out there. Now you've got Microsoft Immersive Reader connected to that to help any of those struggling readers, help them understand what they're reading and all that. So Immersive Reader continuing to connect with just all of these educational apps, which is a great thing to have. So that will take care of news and updates for this week. So let's go ahead and open up the treasure chest and see what's inside this week. So if you listened to last week's episode with Tony Vincent, you heard us talking about the importance of visual communication and things that we could do to help improve our visual communication in class, which kind of got me thinking, and I discovered this week's treasure, and that is the idea of emojis. So emojis are a great thing that you can do. That's an easy thing to put into some of the text-based stuff that you do. It gives some of that visual feedback that students are familiar with. But if you're on a computer, it can be kind of hard, right? If on your phone, you got the emoji keyboard right there and you can click on it and search and all that kind of stuff. But it's a little bit more difficult to find plugins or whatever on keyboards. Except that now it's not, because I recently, a few months ago, discovered that both Mac and Windows have the ability to access an emoji keyboard, and it's actually really simple. So if you're on a Windows computer, you're going to hold the Windows button and hit the period key, and it's just going to pop up the emoji stuff. And then you can type in what you're looking for and it will filter out, or you can click on it and it adds it right there. The Mac does the same thing. If you use the shortcut Control Command Spacebar, it will pull up that emoji keyboard and you can select things from that. Or you can right click anywhere and then there's the emoji. It gives you the emoji option to add emojis. So that's a quick, easy way that you can add some more visual into things you do. So like if you are, let's say, posting an announcement in Google Classroom, you can now throw some emojis in there to draw students' attention to specific pieces of information. If you are doing a slides presentation and you've got some information, add some emoji icons in there to go along with the information that you're putting on those slides. So like I said, it's not something that's going to take you hours of time learning how to do graphic design and designing all these kind of things. That's just a simple, easy way that you can add some of that visualization into your classroom. So check out those emoji keyboard shortcuts. Again, it's the Windows button and the period key on a Windows computer, and then Control Command Spacebar on a Mac. All right, that will take care of this intro segment. Next up, we're going to sink our teeth into this beast of an idea called creativity in this week's Boss Battle. All right, 8-Bit Warrior. So today's boss battle, we're going to get a little creative with it, because that's what we're talking about, is creativity. And this actually connects with something that I have been dealing with in my class for the last few years. And you may not see the connection right away, but when I get through all of this, hopefully you'll be able to see kind of how these ideas connect together. So I teach a honors 10th grade class that is primarily full of freshmen who've been on an accelerated program. And so I get these freshmen in who have taken accelerated courses, and then they come into high school and take my 10th grade class. And I do have some 10th graders in there as well. Some of the ones that work really hard as freshmen and do really well. So I've got kind of a mixture in there, but then I also teach some other courses with students who struggle with English, with writing, and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I have noticed over the last couple of years is that regardless of the level of skill that my students have, whether they are freshmen or seniors, whether they're honors or not, is this issue of writing style. And so I have been racking my brain for the last several years trying to figure out, how do I teach writing style to my students? It seems like one of those things it's hard to teach. And a lot of times what I would come to the end conclusion of was you got to read more. You got to read good authors. You got to read good writers and kind of see what they do and try to imitate them. And while that is true, some of the stuff that I've come across recently about the idea of creativity creativity has actually kind of given me, I think, a bit of a solution on that. So when we talk about this idea of creativity, there's a lot of just different ideas out there. If you ask somebody, what does it mean to be creative, you can get any number of answers. A lot of them probably are going to connect to the arts, right? So if we say, who is a creative person, you're probably naturally going to go to like an artist or a musician or something in those art fields and art related fields where people are being, quote, creative with what they do. And so I think there are some myths that have come up about this idea of creativity that have kind of hindered what we do with that just in life in general. So I wanted to start with some of those kind of myth ideas, but then delve into some practical ideas and applications that we can probably use to help students with this idea of creativity within our classes. So the first myth actually does have to do with this kind of definition of creativity. I think a lot of people think that creativity is this magical cosmic force that's somewhere out there in the ethos. If we're lucky, we might be able to tap into this esoteric entity for a few minutes of inspiration, but then it's fleeting, and then we're just kind of left with nothing. And we get this idea that some people are more creative than other people because they've figured out how to find the muse and they know how to get inspired more often than others, or even to take it a step further, that some people are just born creative and some people are just born logical. Would be the best word that I would use there. And I'm a writer as well. I like to write. I write blog stuff, but I also like to write fiction, fantasy, science fiction types of stories, and that fictional writing tends to be one of those what we would call creative fields. And one of the things that I've learned as a writer, as I've practiced that craft, is that there's really nothing magical about that creativity. And in fact, creativity in something like writing, it really has a lot to do with implementing systems and consistency. I have found that in my writing, the times when I feel the least creative and the times that I struggle with being creative in my writing are the times when I'm not doing it regularly. And so the more practice that I get with it, the more it kind of opens me up to a lot of other possibilities. So I think we need to really embrace this idea that creativity is not some magical force. It's not this thing that we can't put words to, which kind of leads to the second and third myth that are all kind of combined together with that idea. And the second myth is simply this, that knowledge and creativity are enemies and they're in direct opposition with one another. As I mentioned before, I think we kind of put this dichotomy on people where you're either creative or you're logical. You're either this kind of weird, strange, creative person. Oh, they dress their own way and all that kind of stuff. Or you're this kind of stiff, uptight, logical, statistical kind of person. And so we've created this separation between logic and creativity, between knowledge and creativity, that you're either one or the other, which I think has kind of led to the third myth, which is the idea that school really kills creativity. And there's a lot of stuff out there that by teaching standards, by teaching students that you have to do things a specific way, that we're killing their creativity, and that essentially almost like schools are the enemy of creativity outside of, some of those fine arts programs that really, really let students be creative. But, we're cutting those programs. So schools are trying to get rid of students' creativity. And, I don't think that is necessarily true. Now, don't get me wrong, there might be some practices and some policies and some higher up things that do kind of hinder the ability for students to be creative, but I don't think the nature of school itself is what is a detriment to that. And the reason that I say that is there's a video, it's a YouTube video from Jared Cooney Horvath, who I have had on the show before, and it's a video that's titled, "Do Schools Really Kill Creativity?" And I'm going to link it in the show notes, but I did want to kind of go over some of the main ideas that were presented in that and some of the research that he came across and drawing the conclusions from that about this idea of creativity so that we can take a look at how we might be able to utilize these ideas to help students develop that creative thinking a whole lot more. So he starts out with kind of setting up this idea of what is creativity. So what actually happens in the brain when we are doing creative thinking, and there's a lot of research and technical language that are used in the video. I won't get in too much to this because it's a little bit out of my knowledge range, but I will kind of put it in my own words, and then you can watch the video and get some of the more specific details. So there was this study where they were kind of looking at this idea of creativity, and they gave these people what's called an alternate use task, where you essentially give somebody an object and tell them to think of all the different ways that you could use that object potentially. And so as they were kind of monitoring the brain activity, there were two parts that really kind of highlighted what was being used during these activities. So one was kind of the front part of the brain, which is the kind of thinking part of the brain, which is kind of the natural. So you're thinking and trying to think of different uses and all that. It's that frontal, whatever technical term goes along with that. And the other part was the part, I think it's kind of in the middle of the brain, that holds what's called the semantic memory. And the easiest way to describe that is our usable knowledge. And so if we take something like, we know 1 + 1 = 2, that's something that we can just pull out of our heads as usable memory whenever we need it. And so those are the two parts that are used when the brain is doing what we would consider creative thinking. So it's using the thinking, critical thinking, analyzing kind of part of the brain, as well as the usable knowledge memory center of the brain. So the conclusion, that he draws from this research and this study is that knowledge is actually very much an integral part in creativity. Creativity involves thinking, but it's based on that semantic memory. It's based on that ability to access previous knowledge. So when I heard that and kind of watched that and I was thinking about that, it really made me think about when I learned how to play guitar. So we would consider musicians to probably be very creative people, right? And I remember learning how to play guitar and being creative with guitar stuff was not easy. When it comes to sitting down to write a song, it's hard to come up with something that is unique, but something that also sounds good. And so I started thinking about the kind of first years of me learning how to play guitar. And all of this kind of really fit into it because when I first picked up a guitar, I learned a handful of chords, like a G, C, D, throw an E minor in there. So the first few months of me knowing how to play guitar, I was limited to 4 or 5 different chords. Now, if you think about that, if you take 5 chords, the amount of creativity and the amount of different combinations that you could come up with that are pretty limited, right? And so as I continued to play and learn stuff, learned new songs, I learned new chords, then you start bringing in things like scales and modes and all this kind of stuff. And essentially what happens is the more knowledge I gained, the more chords, the more scales, all of that stuff, the more I learned and was able to just quickly recall it, the more creative I was able to be with that. So I was not limited to standard chords. I might get into augmented chords and suspended chords and major sevenths and minor ninths and all this kind of stuff. And so as I expanded my knowledge, my creativity also expanded as well. And so when we look at this idea, building more of that semantic memory, that usable knowledge, really allows us to be a lot more creative. So let's take that back to the classroom. I mentioned at the very beginning of this segment that one of my biggest issues that I've had with students is this idea of writing style. And as I was watching this video and learning about all of this stuff, all of a sudden the light bulb just went off, and I realized I get it. I know why they struggle so much with writing style. Because in English and composition, writing style is really nothing more than being creative with words and phrases. And I realized that the reason that my students struggle with writing style is because they don't have that foundational knowledge of English and grammar kind of stuff. Because of the way that testing has changed in the last several years, basic grammar is not a huge part of the writing. It's more about the organization of the ideas and being able to detail it out. So the focus on grammar foundations is not as strong as it used to be. And, you could say, okay, well, students can learn how to write. They can imitate and copy stuff. They can, but what I'm realizing is that they cannot recall those kind of basic factual pieces of information about writing in order to be able to do something. So if I take something as simple as like a subject, verb, object part of the sentence, if you know how to find a subject, how to find a verb, how to find an object, then you can find different ways to order a sentence. So our standard way of writing a sentence would be subject followed by verb followed by object. But sometimes maybe you put the object at the beginning of the sentence followed by the subject and verb. Or I might do the subject, the object, and the verb. It's weird ways of doing it, but again, that's style, and you can find stylistic ways to do it. So all of a sudden, now by knowing 3 parts of a sentence, I've opened myself up to 3 or 4 different ways of writing that same sentence. And I think this same principle applies in all kinds of content areas. And so I was thinking through all this and thinking about this question: how do we instill creativity in our students? And this is just, these are some ideas that I've come up with, but I would love to hear suggestions as well, because I would love to get other people's take on this idea. So I really kind of came across 3 ideas that I think would be very helpful for helping students be more creative in class. And again, when I say creative, what I'm talking about is being able to use things in a variety of ways. That study that I talked about earlier, it was basically just taking something that was an object, something that people would have foundational knowledge of, and they were just figuring out different ways to use that. And it's the same way kind of in our classes. Instead of a pencil and finding different uses for a pencil, it's a subject and verb in English. It's a formula in math. It's a historical concept in social studies. So a few things that I think we can do in order to try to create this culture and atmosphere of creativity. One is very simple and very easy, is we've got to make sure that we're giving students a strong knowledge foundation. And so when we're talking about instilling creativity, we're not talking about moving away from foundational skills. In fact, what this study kind of shows is that we need to focus a lot more on those foundational skills and help students really understand them. And I think the key in that was the idea of semantic memory versus episodic memory. And if you watch the video, he explains the difference between the two. But essentially, episodic memory is you can remember how to do something in the context where you learned how to do it. So if we're only giving students, say, multiple choice questions about a skill, they're only going to be able to answer it and understand it in a multiple choice question context. So for us to get it in that semantic memory, that usable memory, we've got to have them practice these skills in a variety of ways in a variety of contexts. So if we go back to something like you learned 1 + 1 was 2, maybe you learned it because you had one block and then you had one block, and when you put them together, you counted it and it was 2. And then maybe you looked at it on a number line and, you went to 1 and then you added 1 more and then you saw you were at the number 2. And then you went to the store and this object cost $1 and this object cost $1. So you learned that it was 2. So seeing it in those different contexts help you really solidify in your memory that 1 + 1 does in fact equal 2. And so when we're practicing these skills, I know we have to do some of this stuff to get ready for these standardized tests, but figure out ways to get them to interact with it in different contexts. So have them do multiple choice, have them do short answer, have them do, their own research, whatever kind of different contexts you can put those skills into to help them really solidify into their usable memory. The second idea that I came up with is essentially this: give them times of freedom to use that knowledge in other ways. So yes, they need practice. Yes, they need to learn the information. They need to do multiple choice, short constructor response, fill in the blank, whatever. But find times to allow them to have freedom to use that knowledge in other ways. So for me, kind of maybe in my class, maybe after we go through some basic foundational writing skill kinds of things, we take some time and say, give them a creative writing prompt. And maybe the focus of that writing prompt is to take some of that information that they've used, but then play around with it and just experiment with it, and give them the freedom to take that and do whatever they want with it. And then the third thing is kind of similar to that second one, but I think it takes it maybe another step further, and that's to allow students to experiment these things without the fear that failure is going to have a negative impact on them. And when I say fear of negative impact, we all know that basically we're probably talking about grades here, because that in my opinion is what hinders creativity more than just schools itself, is this fear of a grade. And the reason that I say this is, again, some personal kind of experience from previous years is when I take this idea of writing, and I would venture to say any English teacher would love their students to kind of step out there and create their own writing style and find their own voice. And yet, when they take these standardized tests, even some of our best writers do poorly on the writing portion of these tests because they end up going back to that formulaic way of writing. And a lot of times the reason they do that is because they're scared of scoring lower by taking a chance on some kind of interesting stylistic technique. So whereas, things that they might produce for you in class sound great, sound wonderful, they may end up scoring low because that anxiety of a test makes them revert back to some of that basic writing that they know the test scores are looking for. So I think it's really important to be able to take time to let them experiment with that without the negative fear of something like a lower grade, or that it's going to negatively impact their grade. And I think there are different ways that we can do that. I think it can be involved in the grading process without it having a negative impact on it. And I think that just goes into some of the different content areas that all of us teach. So that's really just kind of my thoughts on this idea of creativity. I don't think that creativity and knowledge and information are enemies with each other. I think that there are a lot of great ways that we can marry these two ideas together to help push our students forward and help them really understand what we want them to know, but then giving them that extra push toward what they could do with all of that. So hopefully those thoughts can help you level up some of the stuff that you're doing in class and really focus on doing more for your students in regards to the idea of creativity. And hopefully even it's given you some good ideas that you can use in your class, which actually brings us to our next segment, and that is this week's 8-Bit Crew Community Board Question of the Week. Before I get into this week's question of the week, if you've heard some background noise during this episode, don't worry. It's just my dog. In the middle of recording, he decided to bust up in here and then promptly laid down and fell asleep. And this dog has been snoozing away this whole time. So if you hear some rumbling in the background, that's just him snoring. But I'll probably throw up a cute little picture in the show notes for y'all to see that. All right, crew members, this is the part of the show where you get to be involved and get to be an active participant. So, question of the week this week, what are some ideas that you have for fostering creativity in your classroom? And this is genuinely something that I would really like to learn a little bit more about and get feedback from folks on, because I love the idea, but then sometimes it's not as easy to put stuff into practice in order to make that happen. So what are some of your ideas or some of your thoughts on the idea of creativity in the classroom? I'd love to hear your feedback on that. As far as me, I think one of the major things that I have really kind of come to the conclusion of in the last several months is that idea of laying those foundational skills and working hard on understanding the foundation principles before getting into that creative flow. For me, I think it has been an easier thing for me to allow the freedom, but I don't think I've done as good of a job of establishing that foundation. And so I'm working to try to build those foundational blocks with my students to give them the tools that they need to be creative. Well, that will just about take care of this episode of the show. If you have enjoyed the show, do me a favor. Make sure to hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm on all podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Basically anywhere you can download podcasts, I'm there. Make sure to hit subscribe. Give me some love. Give me a review. And more importantly, make sure you share the show. If you were able to get something out of the show, if you have enjoyed some of the content, find somebody that you think could benefit from it and share it with them, get them connected. I'd love to build up a community of educators who want to just, share ideas, help each other out, and kind of create that community atmosphere. I think especially in the year that we're having this year, it's really important to have a strong community to kind of fall back on when times get tough. So make sure to share that out and get connected with me. I'm on Twitter at Comic Socks. Follow me, I'll follow you back. We'll chat and maybe talk about some nerdy stuff if you're into that. So on that note, we'll wrap this up. Hang in there, keep getting out there and giving it your best. And until next week, may your swords stay sharp and your shields hold strong. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and check out the 8-Bit Instructor YouTube channel for EdTech tips and tutorials, as well as other content on my website, 8bitinstructor.com. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at ComicSocks and use the hashtag 8BitCrew. See you next week. also, users can now use the I can't talk. So that will take care of news and updates for this week. So let's go ahead and open up the treasure chest. I cannot ever say that.